Folks, for over a year now, we've been extolling the virtues of buying precious metals. As you can see, Fort Knox is about to be audited, and that's imminent, and you're going to see that gold reserves are little to none. What do you think that'll do to the price of gold? And with silver being ransacked with COMEX on the markets, that's sure to follow as well. The only question is, are you going to take action or not? If you haven't, what are you waiting for? And if you have, please take a moment to visit one of our great sponsors here below, the link in the description, and call for the information. It's free. The consultation is free. The cost of not taking advantage of this has lasting consequences, folks. Please tell them John and Chris sent you. You'll be more than happy that you did. Well, everyone, welcome to the podcast. We have a very special guest with us and a returning guest we are always honored to have, Major General Paul Vallely, which we salute you, sir, for being here.
Thank you, John.
Retired four-star general and has become, dare I say, a friend.
Two-star.
Two-star, okay. And we bump you up there a little bit. And dare I say, a burgeoning friend and confidant, and he has brought with us a special guest today, Mr. Michael Maloof, who is an expert in geopolitical matters, particularly in the areas of Russia, which is particularly apropos at this time in history. And he's going to give us his insight as to how he sees things playing out with the war in Russia and Ukraine, among other things. So we're looking forward to getting their insights as well. As always, if you're new to the podcast, please do like, subscribe, and share so the channel can grow and others can gain in the knowledge you're afforded. Now, since we got Mr. Maloof on a short notice here, normally I would read his bio verbatim, but he's going to do that for us in this rarity occasion. So, Michael, if you could please tell the audience a little bit about your background expertise.
Sure. Well, I appreciate you having me, and greetings to the general and to the audience. I'm a former security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense. I was there for 23 and a half years before I retired. I have about 30 years of federal service. The other years were as legislative assistant in the U.S. Senate for various senators. My area was the halt of diversion of technologies to adversaries. And also, I not only did policy analysis, I also had operational experience into the Central Asian countries, which had just broken away from then Soviet Union and became independent countries. So I worked with their border guards. I helped train their border guards in a specialty to halt the influx of terrorists coming through from Tajikistan and Afghanistan at the time, and then the area that I have focused on has been the MENA, if you will, namely Middle East, North Africa, but also the Caucasus, Central Asia. I've also trained special forces in the country of Georgia for a time, and so I have some experience in the Caucasus, and I've been to Russia numerous times, and along with the general, and back in 2017, and then as late as last October, November, two times. One in Kazan, where the BRICS meeting was underway, of some 40 plus countries and their leaders. And then in November in Moscow itself for a one-day conference, in which I came right on back right afterwards. But the difference between Russia of 1990 and what I see today is just phenomenal change. And you see cars, I mean, just as an example, you see cars from all over the world, lights at night. And I keep asking myself, well, where are the sanctions? But you see, therein lies the interesting thing that President Putin has done, and he expressed that very recently to the industrialists as to the need for Russia, in light of their inability to trust the West any longer, to become self-sufficient and to work more and lean more toward the Eurasian world, in what is now becoming the creation of a multipolar world, as opposed to a U.S.-led unipolar world. And that's what we're seeing emerging today. And and even though the West and particularly this Biden administration at the time was saying that Putin was isolated. In Kazan, with some 40 countries and their leaders coming to that to be there with Putin, it really told me in no uncertain terms he is not isolated. It's just the opposite. And he along with Xi Jinping are bringing in not only Iran, but they're bringing in a lot of the global South countries of Africa and also Latin America into the BRICS and also the Belt as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And up until the time of Trump coming on board, there was really no response to the emergence of BRICS and what it intends to do. Basically, their goal, although they won't admit it openly, is to de-dollarize, to break away from the dependency on the dollar, the sanctions from the dollar, and create their own separate financial system that so that they can operate among themselves very, very independently. And this is still evolving, notwithstanding the threats that Trump has made very recently, and saying that any country that involves itself in that transaction of de-dollarizing, they're going to be cut off from trading with the United States altogether. There has been a slight hesitation on some of their parts, but what they're doing is not declaring that they're de-dollarizing, but they're just going ahead and now trading more in their own currencies. And this is the evolution of their system and how they're going to be operating in not killing the dollar, not purposely going after it. In fact, Putin said the purpose is not anti-Western in the creation of BRICS, but to be an addition, something that the developing countries can use, since Western institutions have not reformed sufficiently to accommodate the rise of these developing countries. So this is, and also it helps them to work among themselves and insulate themselves from Western sanctions, and that's what seems to be occurring.
That's exactly.
Also, go ahead, John. Then I can add some things here.
Yeah, please, Major General. Absolutely. No, that's sort of the bane of our wheelhouse, Michael, is the global financial reset, an East-West reset, and how BRICS plays a pivotal role of untucking itself from the dollar hegemony without destroying the dollar. Well, it's really destroying the Federal Reserve dollars to make way for the U.S. note, right, and backed in gold and silver, going back to constitutional law. Yeah. While these countries that were invested in, like Iraq and Vietnam and Zimbabwe and a whole host of others, can prosper wildly, it's a win-win scenario. I'll turn it over to you, Major General. Go ahead.
Well, Michael, I was just going to add what you see globally now is the decline of the European Union, European countries. So with BRICS coming on, it was pointed out to me the fastest growing country last year as far as gross national product was India. And India is a very important part of BRICS right now.
Sure.
And they're also going back to buying a lot of Russian military equipment, I heard.
Sure.
So you have that dynamic going on, but Trump likes India. He had the Prime Minister of India at the White House last month. He's working up with meetings now with Witchkoff on Russia and Iran. Those meetings are ongoing. So it's a very positive thing for America now that we want to engage these people. But Michael, the Europeans don't get it other than Moroni from Italy and Orban from Hungary. I mean, those two really understand what the hell's going on over there. But these idiots in the UK and France and Germany, I mean, it's crazy.
Well, you've raised a whole lot of issues right there in your comment, General. And the problem with the Europeans is that they have not moved on. The history of UK, for example, and France against Russia goes back centuries. They just haven't emerged from that problem. And as a consequence, when they were a world power and they had a navy, excuse me, I'm going to.
They only have 44 ships now, Michael.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I think they have
they're broke.
44 ships and 45 admirals, the last I heard, UK.
They're fundamentally broke. And when up in Northumbria, when they can't even afford to pick up the garbage, and yet they're sending billions of pounds to Ukraine, that tells me something's fundamentally wrong. They haven't emerged, and I think what's happened, and Putin is really playing this. And I think what he sees is the potential for the disintegration of NATO as we know it, and we've seen this now occurring. And Trump, on the other hand, is not opposed to. I think he recognizes the emergence of the multipolar world order, but he also has a greater geostrategic perspective, and that is to reestablish or renew the diplomatic channels with Russia, and rather than trying to work based upon ideological grounds, we're seeing what's coming back are big power players: United States, Russia, China, and now we're going to be seeing Iran coming into this, because those other two countries, namely Russia, China, regard Iran as very integral to their Eurasian approach in the future. Simply because by virtue of its physical location, it represents the north, south, east, west corridor for much of its trade with the rest of the world. And so that's why you're seeing that's why Iran was allowed into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization last year and was admitted into BRICS as a result. That's how important they regard Iran. And that's why I think Trump recognizes that. And I think, given the interest that Trump has for a geostrategic relationship or renewal of that with Russia, I think he's prepared to work through Putin to come up with a resolution on the nuclear problem that he has with Iran. And that does other things for his relationship, for example, with Netanyahu. That will have some friction, cause some friction. But that be that as it may, what we're seeing is evolving this new world order and big power play that's coming around, and a recognition, perhaps again, or reintroduction of the notion of spheres of influence that used to exist, in which Trump is basically, and he had this notion during his first term, in which we would keep our nose out of East Europe and his areas, and Central Asia, if Russia, China stay out of Latin America. Well, during the Biden administration, all that changed. So he's trying to change this world order thing real fast, and he has very little time politically because of the midterms. So he's got to. That's why you're seeing so much chaos right now, which the Democrats can't keep up with. And I think it's funny how they can't react. They can't respond to it because there's so many things happening at once.
Yeah, it's a rapid fire, something old, something new, Michael, for sure. So.
Oh yeah.
So
he's keeping his opposition totally off balance as a result of this. But the one thing that we've got to watch carefully are the bond markets, the tariffs. I see how he's using tariffs for targeting purposes, but the bond market, they've been cashing in, as it were, and that's basically the sale of our debt. But we don't have enough currency to back it all up if they all decided to fold, So right. He's watching that, and I think that might have been why he backstepped a little bit on the push on the tariffs, and started for 90 days to work with these some 80 or 90 countries to work out deals.
Well, that's how you do a deal, right, Michael?
Yeah, exactly.
You back off, you negotiate, you come to some conclusion. He's the master of it.
General, I always tell people, if you read chapter 2 of The Art of the Deal, and you can Google it, it gives you the whole outline of how he operates.
Yeah, and it's not that difficult to understand.
No.
No.
It's something like that. Yeah, it's amazing. But John, yeah, what Michael's pointed out is a whole new world here. And
Absolutely.
it doesn't involve Klaus Schwab or the World Economic Forum or the World Health Organization. Those globalists are sitting back now because they've been basically defeated, in my opinion.
I
The
agree.
globalists. And like Michael said, it's a whole new world order now, initiated and basically directed by President Trump. And I think Putin likes it. But you know what I was going to bring up, John?
Yes, sir.
If you look at American media, whether you look at Fox News, Newsmax, NBC, CNN, any of them, they never have a Russian analyst on to explain the Russian side of things. Michael, have you noticed that? Not one.
Oh, totally. People think in the West that Putin woke up one morning and said, "Hey, I think I'll go and invade Ukraine today." No, it didn't work that way.
Oh.
For 10 years, 8 years, since 2014, there has been a buildup, and the Western media never really picked up on it because Kyiv, for all that time, up until from 2014 to 2022, had been bombing and shelling daily the eastern part of the country, Donbas, Luhansk, those regions that are Russian, predominantly Russian speaking. And they finally called it. And even though they try to settle it a few months later in Istanbul with Minsk I, Minsk II, and were initialed by the Ukrainian side, the West put pressure on Zelensky to hold tough and to resist. And we see the plus the introduction, the threat of NATO expansion once again, which Putin found intolerable as a consequence. When we fundamentally violated we violated some half a dozen agreements made from the 1990s or even a little earlier. There were 6 agreements, and they centered around the issue of indivisibility. You don't arm the West at the expense of the East. And all that NATO expansion that occurred, contrary to the promises that were made to Russia over time by 3 presidents and 1 Secretary of State, was in violation of those promises they made. And where was Russia to go? They were being surrounded, and the likes of Victoria Nuland and Bojo, as he's called, Boris Johnson. They saw a containment of Russia was their policy, if not the overthrow of the government. So,
well, Michael, they still keep throwing out there that Putin wants to resurrect the old USSR. I heard it this morning by somebody. He doesn't have any intention to do that. It's all Western propaganda. But John, I was just going to say, you're not going to hear on any other show what Michael and I are pointing out today. And it was interesting. I was interviewed of all places, the National Enquirer last week. And the editor there was interviewing. He says, "Why are you sympathetic to Russia?" I said, "I'm not sympathetic to Russia. I'm just trying to point out the Russian side, which no one else is doing but Michael Maloof and myself. Nobody else.
Yeah.
Nobody else is putting out, because we've studied that. We have cognitive deep thinking on that whole issue over there. And we have experience there. I challenge anybody that's put on it. How long has it been since you talked to a Russian diplomat? How long has it been since you've been to Russia? Usually it's a great big 0.
Yeah, I talked to one just last week.
Oh, did you?
So, we're in constant touch. We compare notes. And the other thing too is that for 8 years I saw the videos of the bombings that were occurring in Donbas and Luhansk. And the reason why that was going on is because they resisted and wanted to have an autonomous region, because they didn't agree with Kyiv looking westward or joining the EU. And in fact, that's what brought the government down, was because the the president who was overthrown but was duly elected had resisted doing that. He was looking more toward Eurasia, and as a consequence, there was a coup instigated by then Vice President Biden and Victoria Nuland.
Michael, can you talk a little bit about the Azovs and who they are and what part they played in the Ukraine? The Azovs, the Nazi Azovs.
The Nazi
Oh,
battalion.
the Azov group. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they're a network. They were they're very neo-Nazi. They really are. You look at their symbols and what have you. What was intriguing is that they got incorporated into because of their power, and they became independent. They were actually fiercely independent of Kyiv itself. And I think the only way that Zelensky could control them was to incorporate them into the Ukrainian military. And that's what he did. Now, they have an extensive network throughout all of West Europe and into the United States. And this is how they've been recruiting Americans, among others, to join Azov to fight in Ukraine as mercenaries. And so the network is quite extensive, but they have a very neo-Nazi approach. And you look at their symbols, everything is very Nazified. And they would, pardon?
Weren't they the ones that attacked the eastern provinces and bombed them?
Yeah, well, they were involved. Yeah, they were very much involved. But the interesting thing about them is that they're the ones who are continually pushing into the eastern portion. They're the ones that seem to countermand whatever Zelensky wants to do. And my concern is that if Zelensky decides to stop fighting and negotiate, that he's going to be dead in 24 hours, because they want to continue that pressure against Russia. They continually want to fight. And they also are not very pro-Kyiv government either, even though they're incorporated into the military. They are an element all to themselves. And they have other elements that are very right-wing, that are militarized and also have been incorporated. So Azov is just like one of about 5 or 6 of these entities that exist in Ukraine. And they always support Stefan Bandera, who was a Nazi sympathizer, worked with the Nazis during World War II against the Soviet Union. So there's a history.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Thank you, Michael. I mean, I was kind of just sitting here to shut up and let you two have this brilliant interplay, because a lot of the, quite frankly, well, Major General knows this because I work with him all the time as an honor there. So I try to have a diverse array of questions. Honestly, Michael, you've just answered about half the questions I was going to ask you.
Oh, no.
No, that's
sorry.
No, it's fine. No, it's these things tend to be organic like this. That's the best way, because it just becomes a natural progression of things, and you're doing it beautifully. Because let's try to simplify from the great cogent information that you've just given. And this is any question, by the way, Michael, that I ask you, I'm also asking Major General, so it's kind of a round robin. So you've talked about, I was going to start with the Russian-Ukrainian quote unquote war, which we believe has already been resolved, and mostly for optics. So since you've gone to such great articulation in these points, I'll just ask you sub questions to mop them up.
Sure.
Do you think it's already been resolved behind the scenes? And when do you think that we're going to see an official resolution with Russia-Ukraine front of scenes?
I think it was yesterday, Trump in the White House, in the Oval, hinted that they had come up with some interesting things that they were about ready to come up with. Now you have Zelensky was complaining about Witkoff being very pro-Russian. Witkoff has basically said, look, Ukraine is going to have to give up territory. That's a reality. I mean, that is, and if you look at the extent to which Moscow has advanced troops, just to a certain point. But as long as the war goes on, he's going to go to the Dnieper River, which splits the country in half, and maybe try to take Odessa if Zelensky does not settle immediately. But as I said, if he tries to, he'll probably be dead by other elements within the country. Now, Putin has made it very clear he has no intention of trying to take over all of Ukraine. In fact, he said he would welcome an independent Ukraine, but he's basically already annexed the eastern portion. He's annexed it. They had referenda within those areas, and they all voted, including Crimea, to go with Russia. And that's the direction it's going. But as long as Zelensky refuses to stop and to negotiate, he's going to advance. And that's why this thing that happened in Sumy just the day before yesterday, in my opinion, it was aimed at military elements, even though the Western press never mentioned that. They said it was people going to church and on Palm Sunday. There might have been some admittedly collateral damage, but they were aiming at a military formation, and they had very good information. And the fact that the Ukrainians would publicize that such a thing was going to be going on prior to the missiles coming in and hitting them suggested to me that they were setting up a black flag opportunity for the Russians so that they could go to the West and complain about how they want to negotiate, but Russia keeps bombarding us. Well, there's a reason for that, and the Russians have said that they're going to start accelerating now, unless and until Zelensky decides to negotiate. So, and that's what's going to be happening here in the very near future. We're into the springtime. He can start rolling the tanks and the artillery. And he's just recruited 150,000 more troops. But I think Trump feels that he has a settlement. And again, it's not just Ukraine. He's looking at that at a more geostrategic overlay on everything, so that he can work with his equal strategic partner on a variety of other areas. And I think it would be good to have that kind of collaboration and cooperation with Russia in a variety of areas where we could use their help in many things.
Agreed. Major General?
Well, I think that zone there in the east, I'm not, the bullets have to stop flying. Zelensky's got to stop sending drones, bullets, just stop. Zelensky had announced today, he could say 1 p.m., no more bullets, nothing, we're stopping. Putin would stop at that point, in my opinion. Now, I don't believe in these peacekeeping troops and setting up a demilitarized zone, as some people have said. I don't like that. I'd like to see it an opportunity zone, an industrial zones where they can restart rebuilding that whole country with plants, manufacturing. And as I understand it, Michael, Ukraine's already lost anywhere from 15 to 20 million of their population have gone out of Ukraine to other countries. Very large.
That's true.
Very large
That's
amount.
true.
And so how do you attract those people to come back? So I don't want to see an armistice like Korea. That never worked because we're still fighting the battle over there with the North Koreans and spending all that money over these years. But stop fighting, stop the bullets. And that's what Trump has said.
Yeah,
I'll add on to one thing the general pointed out about the so-called peacekeepers from the West. They are totally unacceptable to Putin. That's sort of a backdoor way to introduce NATO troops. I should say Western troops into Ukraine, in which they would try to push NATO. But that operation would be not acceptable to NATO as a defense alliance. You cannot get 32 countries as an alliance to agree on that. We've seen opposition even from Hungary, Slovakia, and a few others, and certainly Putin or Trump is not going to agree to it. So that's a non-starter. Even though you have the British and the French pushing that.
Yeah, you remember what Moroni said a couple of weeks ago from Italy? There's no Italian troops I'm going to put on Ukrainian soil.
That's right. But you always hear Starmer saying they want to include them with U.S. support. Well, forget that notion.
Yeah, exactly.
Not going to happen.
But how can France and England afford it?
They can't-
Economically, they're broke. Europe is broke. Look at Germany. They're broke.
Yeah,
And they want to take at least 5 years. They want to continue the war, as I understand it, for another 5 years until which time they can reorient their industrial base for more military production. We can't support that. You know,
No.
when you look at the entire 20th century, and even before, we have pulled the chestnuts of the Europeans out of wars at least 2 times in the 20th century. But the war that the UK has with Russia goes back prior to the time of our American Revolution. In fact, it was Catherine the Great who had turned the British down from recognizing the British blockade against the U.S. colonies at the time.
well, they say any Germany or France or UK would be having trouble putting one fighting brigade out on the battlefield. And then I read they have as many admirals as the British Navy as they do operating ships now.
Yeah, it's going to be a high-ranking fleet.
Yeah.
You know, and
No,
go ahead, Michael.
But I was just going to say that during our Civil War, once again, the Russians refused any blockades and any assistance to the Confederacy, and supported the Union. They were much more outright about that in supporting of the Union. In fact, the Russians seem to feel that they're sort of like foster parents to the creation of the United States. They sold us Alaska.
Yeah.
That's right.
Stewart's Folly. That's right. You know, so
Yeah.
that's
you
a great.
can see Russia from the United States when you get up there, right, Michael?
Yeah, exactly. If you look at it from the North Pole.
That's it. Yeah.
I'm enjoying the dialogue between you two and just being a fly on the wall. It's great.
John, maybe we ought to pull out a cigar like Michael. What do you think?
I don't know. You could probably make it work better than I could, but he's got his own styling going on there for
He's
sure.
fun to
Yeah,
travel with too. We went to some great Russian restaurants when we were there.
I'll bet. And one thing I was just going to say, Michael, really quick, and correct me if I'm wrong, but all my studies with Russia and Ukraine is also that our American media, I'm saying loosely, glosses over the fact that because Donbas and Luhansk are actual Russian provinces with Russian-speaking citizens living in Ukraine, they actually went there and rebuilt a lot of those apartment complexes and buildings away from the Azov Battalion, fed and clothed a lot of those people. A lot of children, I believe, were being born in some of the lower basement levels of those buildings. And then, Russia saved our bacon U.S. geopolitically and financially during World War II. And seemingly their history is repeating itself. They're doing it all over again. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I think we're going to be. Russia has never really been conquered. Come to think about it, but when you look at the history, going back to the 19th century, you see, we Americans don't know history, and this has been the proverbial problem. If they studied it, and they don't have time, I understand they're trying to make a living and all that stuff, but if they knew the history of things, I think they would have a different reaction and perspective on where we are today based upon those historical events. And, the Germans, for example, did exactly what the Ukrainians did in going to the Kursk region, and they got decimated. And right now, the Ukrainians who are in the Kursk region in Russia are now surrounded, and Putin has basically made a deal with Trump not to slaughter them all. He wants to give them an opportunity to surrender. But you have elements there that say, if you leave, we're going to shoot you in the back. So, the poor Ukrainian grunt is caught between the rock and hard place now. And this is unfortunate, but that's why this war needs to be wound down and stopped once and for all. That's all there is to it.
I agree. And also something you were saying, Major General, earlier before we move on, is the timing, God's timing is pretty amazing. Because, and I think also, Michael, you were alluding to it, that they have a solution I think they've kind of had for a while, coming on the eve of Resurrection Sunday, I don't think there's any coincidence that's happening on one of God's providential time frames. So of course. So the last question on this subject before we move forward, because I want to be able to, Major General knows I like to cover a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time. So you both were integrally involved. Major General, you and I first talked about this on our very first podcast. So it's nice that we can sort of circle back to the subject. But as I understand it, you were both integrally involved in 2017, 2018 to put the meeting together between President Putin and President Trump with the famous proverbial soccer ball. Can you touch on that, how that came about, how you arranged that meeting, and what transpired?
Well, as I recall, Michael can correct me, but we were at a conference over there on the Middle East that was hosted by their sort of equivalent.
The Vallely, the Vallely discussion group.
Yeah, Vallely. They're similar, I think, Michael, to maybe Heritage, think tank. So we got invited to be speakers over there, and so the first day I was up on the podium with a guy named Khashoggi. Do you remember that name? Khashoggi was the Saudi that was murdered in the Turkish consulate. He was a Saudi journalist. Well, anyhow, that started off the thing. Khashoggi was there with me, and then we had a press conference that afternoon over at Vallely. But I think it was the next day or the day after, Michael, I can't quite remember. Michael came up to me and he said, somebody wants to talk to you. He's over there. So I walked over, and it turned out to be a gentleman named Alistair Crook. Sounds like out of James Bond, doesn't it? Crooke, who turned out to be retired MI6, retired out of Beirut, and now is living in the Tuscany region of Italy. And Michael, I think he said to me, the president wants to meet you or somebody at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I went back and told Michael, and so Michael and I think we took a taxi over, but it was the foreign ministry is where we were supposed to go.
Foreign ministry.
And so Michael and I got out of the taxi, we walked in, went through security, and then a very attractive brunette came down to meet us, to take us up to the 7th floor. Now, what's interesting, the head of the foreign ministry is on the 7th floor, and in Foggy Bottom, the State Department, our Secretary of State's on the 7th floor. I don't know what that means, but so Michael and I go up there, we sit down, and guess who's there? A friend of mine that I've known for a year or so named Mikhail Bogdanov. And he was Putin's top guy for the Middle East. And as Michael told me later, it was Bogdanov who got me invited to go over there and speak along with Michael. And so we had some tea there and coffee. And as I recall, Michael, there was a young blonde there who was an interpreter. And then another woman came in who was the head of the American desk, probably early 40s, very attractive. And so we're chatting about that. And I'm looking at Michael, and we're talking about things, how great the conference was. And so I sort of said, well, why can't we do a Reagan-Gorbachev meeting in Reykjavik, Iceland, renew all of that? I think I'm saying this right, Michael.
Yeah, you're fine.
And so the head of the American desk, Renette, she says, well, we got it was either the G8 or G10 meeting coming up in June. Why don't we do it then? So anyhow, I came back, and I'd sent an email back to some people I knew in the White House, and that's when they said Putin wants to meet with Trump and do it in June, and that's what happened. Michael, you can add to that if you want to.
We let nature take its course after that.
Yeah. Then we went out to a great dinner. But yeah, that's why that was very simple. You know, we just laid it out there. Let's put them together, and so that's what happened.
But that did show how sometimes how efficient things can move when the pachyderms want to move on something, and they saw a political opportunity.
Yeah.
And we were there to help, in which we could help facilitate it, and I'm glad we did it for a time. It did bring on a rapprochement, and but unfortunately, it was during the period in which Trump was being accused of collusion during the first term. It was just terrible what was happening.
I think after we came back, that's when all that started, the Russian collusion.
Oh yeah,
in 2017 and all that stuff, and then they did meet, but then it got worse and worse against Trump. And so it never went to fruition to the extent that it should have been under Reagan and Gorbachev when they met. But that's history.
Yep.
That's amazing. It was such an honor to have a bird's eye view of the construct of it and two of the men that engineered the whole process, because most people don't get that level of information at all. It's kind of glossed over, as you kind of alluded to earlier, Michael. So you touched on something which was actually one of my question points. So I'm going to reverse it, which is fine. I love it. I mean, again, it's more,
I did it again.
no, I mean, it's a good, that means you're over the target, which is great. And Major General, I actually have a custom question for you that we'll address momentarily, but you started sort of.
We're only going to do 30 minutes today.
I know. I think that ship has
That's
sailed.
okay.
It's too juicy.
Hey, General, we're on a roll.
On a roll, yeah.
Let's not deprive the people, shall we?
Yeah.
Agreed.
But I appreciate it. I appreciate your brevity, though, Major General, as always. So you were touching, Michael, on the financial side, which is kind of our wheelhouse, as I mentioned earlier. So I really want to circle into this because you're one of the few people that we can get to talk about the BRICS in depth because of your background and you both having a seat at the table. So you mentioned this already. So I'm going to segue two questions into one. So just bear with me a little bit. You mentioned that the tariffs are working, that he's placed a 90-day pause, mainly for the 75 countries we know housed within BRICS. China is obviously separated aside. And we believe that's primarily to get China, and I think you're one of the people that can talk about this. I think that's wholly designed to get China to pay back. Remember, Trump said that China was going to have to pay back at least 10 trillion that they owed us, probably closer to 20 or 25, and when it's all said and done. But we think that's for the bonds, the land, and all the things that they've basically grifted from us to come back. Do you agree on that? Number two, do you think he's going to need the 90 days for the agreements to get done with these 75 nations, or do you think it's already done clandestine?
I think on the first question, the Chinese, the effort that he's done is designed to put significant pressure on China. What you didn't throw in there was their theft over the years of intellectual properties.
Yes,
and that's in the hundreds of billions of dollars over time with all Western countries. And so, and the fact that Xi Jinping today is in Vietnam is indicative of something else. He's looking for alternative markets because that's a signal to me that he does not intend to lighten up anytime soon. I think what Xi Jinping is working on is his global South connections to establish alternative markets because of the $342 billion of stuff he can no longer sell into the United States, and at the same time, I think he's aware that Trump is on a time limit, namely midterm elections. He's got to accomplish something. But I think he's going to attempt to hold out for some time. Other countries are less so. They have far less they have far more to lose. Although China does too. But China is they're resilient in some respects in that what they can do with Vietnam and countries in the Eastern Asian area is set up arrangements and sell the stuff to, let's say, Vietnam, and the made in China label is taken off and then made in Vietnam label is put on. And so this can be a means of indirect means of them to get their products into the United States and still take it and still bypass the tariffs. That I think is what Xi Jinping is working on. And at the same time, he's basically sold all of his dollars. I think he's looking for gold now. And I think what we've got to be very, very concerned about, as I said earlier, is the possibility they may sell off the bonds, which is our debt, and in which and that's over $1 trillion by itself. So this could, if he did that, that could actually throw the entire economic system in the world on its ear,
Mhm.
It could really turn it upside down. The other consideration is what's going on with Iran. Iran provides China with 80% of its oil, and it cannot afford to have that supply disrupted. So I think what he may do is not only continue that hardline economic pressure on the United States for that reason, but also start agitating more with Taiwan, and so that we don't have a time to be able, we wouldn't be able to focus in one area, but we'd have to divide our, and so this is sort of like a divide and conquer. It's
Mhm.
almost like the uh, art of war being implemented in the 21st century
Yeah,
by the
Sun Tzu.
Chinese themselves,
Mhm.
and I think they're being very clever about it, but I think that you have O'Leary, for example, one of the big financial wizards out there, saying we should slap 400% tariffs on the Chinese.
Mhm.
Well, again, I don't think it'll matter to the Chinese because their industries, they're going to look for alternative means of diverting their products, but they've got to their industries have got to work. Well, otherwise, they could have serious internal problems. And that's one thing that's working against Xi Jinping. Those industries have to produce. The Chinese worker needs to provide for his family, his and her family. And so that's a consideration that he's looking at as a result of this. And if right now no Chinese products will be allowed in directly with made in China,
Mhm.
and I think that but I think he feels he can wait out Trump for a time at least. So this is going to be uh, I don't want to say a Mexican standoff, but it's basically come to that.
It's a chess match. Go
Let
ahead,
me
Major.
give you
Yeah.
a little different spin. We do have surveillance that shows the container ships that left China in the last week have turned around because they have nobody else to sell their, other than a few countries, their junk products that they make. I don't think China is not in good shape. They have basically a housing dilemma going on over there. Um, uh, Xi Ping, Xi Ping.
Xi
How do I say
Jinping.
it? Xi Jinping. Yeah, I get these names mixed up. I'm not sure he knows what to do. He's not a master dealer like Trump is. Trump will outthink him, and he'll outmaneuver him. Uh, and if you go back in history, and I didn't realize and understand tariffs as an old military guy until I listened to an interview on Tucker Carlson a couple of weeks ago by this expert, brilliant guy in economics. But he explained the massive transfer of U.S. wealth since World War II in the last 50 years because we have let these countries take advantage of us, like China,
Mhm.
like Germany. I mean, you go to Berlin, you'll never see a Chevy or a Cadillac. When I served over there, the tariffs were 40% on a car if you brought it in from America. So Trump is on the right track. Kevin O'Leary's on the right track. China's going to come our way, I predict, but they're in a dilemma now, and they're not in good shape. Uh, so I would think that we'll wait it out. It's going to take time, but I think it's going to come around and it's going to be very positive.
But John, to get to the second part of the question you originally asked me,
Yeah.
I think deals are being made. I
Mhm.
think the sheer volume of dealing with 75, 80 countries, it's going to take time, and they've got to work out. Each country has its own issues
Right.
regarding tariffs.
Yeah.
The thing with Europe is that they impose other kind of indirect taxes, such as a VAT tax,
VAT
and
tax on top of it.
and they yeah and other kinds of trade barriers that are not readily visible in the whole tariff argument. So these are the kinds of issues, and that makes it more complex. So I think that 90-day pause is probably prudent. Some countries will go much quicker. I understand that a deal is being made now with one of the countries. I don't know which one it is.
I think it's Vietnam and Taiwan.
India,
say again?
Vietnam and Taiwan.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a beginning. And yeah, but to get to where we are right now, they had to be already been talking. So
Right.
I think that it's like taking an exam. You do the easy questions first, and then you go back to the harder ones later.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, each day we're going to get more positive news. China doesn't know what to do against Trump. They really don't.
Yeah, 100%.
They may think they're smart, but they're not as smart as Trump. They're clever, though.
No, yeah, they're strategic, to your point, Major General, absolutely. And what I was getting at, Michael, is we're really looking keenly here at an East-West global currency reset. Many of us have invested in, because we know President Trump has dinar from Iraq. He's got a lot of dong. You mentioned earlier in your thesis about China working with Vietnam as a trade partner, but they have had a vested interest in the Vietnamese dong because they have a lot of it. We're looking for that to break forth so that Americans, as well as other people in the world, can prosper in these countries at the same time, can separate from the dollar hegemony and have their own sense of nationalism that we've been afforded instead of this sort of.
But the one thing we've got to be careful is stripping of labels. They could actually be Chinese goods with Vietnam labels, and that's the one thing. That's why I think That's why I think Trump is looking more toward India, maybe Bangladesh, and a few other countries, other than for alternative sources. I think Apple just said that they probably would move out of China and into India to produce, rather than coming all the way to the United States. And so, we see a lot of things in motion here.
It's a lot easier than we think. If you buy American, you won't pay tariffs tax.
Yeah, but you see, we don't have the infrastructure, General.
Yeah, we do. We're building it. We got all sorts of stuff going on. Tell me one thing that you can't buy right now that's not made in America that you want.
Some inexpensive flashlights.
We make them in America.
But
by the way, we have the minerals we're digging up now with the new mining that's going on. We have lithium deposits that are incredible in one of our states right now.
But it's really going to be important in the long term for the United States to become self-sufficient in a variety of areas. In its area manufacturing, the defense budget, for example, is looking more toward how do we incorporate and be more involved in a defense production budget as opposed to before. Because we have lessons from Ukraine that showed that our stockpiles went down so fast, but we couldn't produce fast enough. That's going to be another consideration. And our own pharmaceuticals. We don't even produce our own pharmaceuticals here. We need to create that whole new industry.
And produce them then.
Yeah, I agree with you, but it's going to take a little time.
We got all the ingredients, so we can.
I agree.
Right
now, you got to put it all together, but we got to keep in mind Trump's only been in office for 90 days. So, but he has 3.75 more years to go. Hopefully, we can accomplish that. The steel industry. I remember when I was working on Capitol Hill. It was under Carter that we were basically selling our steel industry abroad. We built up after World War II. We built up the Chinese steel industry and the German steel industry at the detriment of our own. Theirs became much more modern than ours, and they came in and were able to undercut, be able to bring in steel that and undercut our own ability, and that we call that dumping.
Well, all of that over the last decades, 50 years, our leaders have been negligent. Now we have a leader that's going to pull together, and he likes to emit a very positive attitude, which is great for a leader. But like you were saying, Michael, it's going to take time, especially a lot of these spare parts are made overseas that we have to make here now. So anyhow, what I'm just saying, buy American. I'm not buying anything that's not American. I agree with you. I don't need anything that's not made in America.
There you
I
go.
need
I just don't need
zero.
anything. So
You don't need
that's easy.
anything. John
Just
doesn't
don't
need
need anything.
anything. My
Yeah.
next door neighbor doesn't need a damn thing from China, when you think about
Nothing from China.
it.
So staying with that theme, gentlemen, about what's going on with, the Russian-Ukrainian agreement where we started, he's also, as you both know, set to meet.
John, you froze.
Oh, I'm here. I'm still here.
Michael's frozen.
I think you froze, Michael.
I think we got to end up. There he is.
And Michael's rejoined us. So
Okay, good.
couple more questions for you guys to wrap up. So President Trump is set to go to the Middle East as well to solve things over there, both in Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Iran. You were talking about that earlier, as well as Xi. How do you see these peace agreements working out in terms of timing and strategic placement? Do you think all at once or piece by piece?
Go ahead, Michael.
I've got a slightly different perspective on Middle East
Sure.
than the general does.
Okay.
But I think, however, it's significant to me that not only were the conferences on Gaza, but also Ukraine were held in Saudi Arabia, and now Trump has announced that he may even meet Putin there, and he wants to have a final negotiation there in Saudi Arabia. That tells me volumes about how he may not be in full agreement with Netanyahu on a settlement or even the bombing of Iran.
Mm-hmm.
For a guy who wants peace, trying to settle two other war spots, you don't want to create a third one, which could precipitate a fourth one in Taiwan. So, because if Iran is attacked, I can guarantee you the Chinese will invade or blockade Taiwan just to distract. So I think that this is these guys, these are strategic thinkers. Xi and Putin, they can play us, and they know we only have so much. We got drained. Our own military supplies have been drained as a result of Ukraine and supplying to Israel over time. So I think the fact that Trump is looking to Saudi Arabia and has once again said that's going to be his first foreign visit suggests to me that he's looking beyond his own presidency. That in doing that, he's basically going along with what Crown Prince Salman wants for a Middle East settlement in order to have normalization of relations once again with Israel and Saudi Arabia and an expansion of the Abraham Accords. That implies a two-state solution, because that's what the Crown Prince is demanding. Mm-hmm. And that is absolutely contrary to what Netanyahu has in mind. So I think, I don't know how it's going to go ultimately, but I think we're seeing Trump beginning to shift his focus a little bit now in the Middle East, and because he does not want, and come to think about it, the fact that Witkoff was talking directly, and I would say directly, to the Iranians was contrary to what Netanyahu wanted to do. So this is, it's telling me something that is not readily public, and that is that there still is a resentment between Trump and Netanyahu on a personal level. And there were two instances which really irritated Trump. One was Netanyahu pulled out at the last minute the joint operation to kill Soleimani back in 2000. It was done by the United States, but it was supposed to be a joint operation. Number two, Netanyahu congratulated Biden on his victory in 2020. That just caused Trump to go through the overhead. And I don't think he ever forgot it.
No, he's got a long memory for sure.
Oh, yeah.
And remember, Q said Israel be safe for last. So that makes a lot of sense, what you were saying. This question is for you, Major General, and we'll end with you. And
I was going to pick off after.
Oh, please. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Question.
Yes.
First of all, there'll never be a two-state solution. They're going to reposition and habit the Arabs that are in Gaza. They're already looking for the Palestinian Authority to take more. Negotiations are going with al-Sisi to go into the Sinai and build 3 new towns and villages. They'll mow down Gaza completely, and they will redevelop it into something where the Arabs can move back into there with housing and jobs and so on. So I see that as the Trump plan, and I think that's what's realistic. But many of the countries don't want the so-called Arab Palestinians. They just don't want them. But I think they'll have to work out to take most of them. They've got to get them out of there so that they can rebuild Gaza again into something that's going to be more beneficial to the Arabs. But we'll see.
Indeed, indeed. Again, last question for the day for time's sake, and this I'll start with you on this one, Major General, and then Michael. Obviously, any feedback you have is always appreciated. So we've seen an uptick in firings of 9 senior officers with a particular focus on several admirals being fired, such as Vice Admiral Shoshana Chatfield, to include the seminal firing of 4-star generals such as General Tim Haw of the Air Force, as well as the director of the NSA. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth seems to be taking aim at cleaning house within the ranks summarily across the board. Other examples include firings of naval commanders such as Brent Robley and Master Chief Felix Phillips. So my question is, what does this mean for the future of security clearances for military personnel who are fired or stepped down, especially as it relates to high-ranking military officials going forward?
You want me to take that one, Michael?
Yeah, go ahead. Start, General.
Well, first of all, in Pete Hegseth's book, and I've written about it, we need a mass cleansing of our military. That the leaders went woke, CRT, DEI. That's all being cleaned out right now. And we saw what happened to the Air Force Lieutenant Colonel up in Greenland when she made some snide remarks. But we have so many ineffective leaders at the senior level. We need a whole new cast of leaders in the Pentagon leading our units, which are war fighters. And so there's a lot of work to be done yet. When you see what Doge is going to find out, excuse me, of all the money that's been wasted in the Pentagon that has gone to these subcontractors and subcontractors, and then like Michael pointed out, I mean, we got to rebuild our whole ships again. So we need shipbuilding in America. That's going to cost a lot of money. We don't need a lot of commands. I don't believe we need the Joint Chiefs of Staff anymore. We need a 5-star general admiral that can report directly to the president, and he commands the armed forces of America. I wrote to Trump to change the Department of Defense to the Department of the Armed Forces of America. And that's what it should be. And take the defense out of it. We have parallel staffing, as Michael knows, in the Pentagon. You've got the Department of Army, Secretary of the Army, Secretary of the Air Force. And then you got the 4-star Chief of Staff of the Air Force, Chief of Staff of Naval Operations. And as Michael knows, they're all duplicate staffs. We don't need all those duplicate staffs. I'd fire half of the civilians that are political appointees in the Pentagon and the Armed Forces. We don't need them anymore. That's what our military is trained for, to run that. Now you can bring them in for specialties, for industrial base understanding, contract things, let the uniformed people work on war fighting and make sure we're prepared. But the total Pentagon needs to be cleansed all the way from the top to the bottom. And the troops want to see a change too. They want to see good, strong leaders. Anyhow, that's my take.
Anything you want to add, Michael?
General, I concur. I concur with the general's view entirely. The key, as has been pointed out, is lethality, and you're having to change the whole mindset, because these guys over time have become very, very relaxed and very comfortable in their little suites, and we have more generals and admirals now than we did during World War II.
Yeah,
and that's got to change. We need people. We need war fighters out there, and not replication. We're seeing so much duplication everywhere, and it's just unnecessary. I personally think we need to eliminate the Director of National Intelligence. I mean, that's just another layer on
Yeah.
top of everything else.
Totally unnecessary.
Yeah, they're most of them are seconded from the intelligence community. It just slows everything down, or from the CIA. It just slows everything down. Things need to get to the president quickly, and it needs to be actionable, and it needs to be real time, and they need to be brief, and the process needs to be streamlined, and that's why if you cut the U.S. government in half, that's probably still not enough.
I agree, Michael.
I tend to agree with that completely. So what we do, Michael, here is at the end, I'll start with Major General and then end with you as one of the guests. Well, I always ask him, where can people find your work? And last thoughts he has for the audience. So I'll extend you that courtesy as well. So Major General.
Well, they can go to the Stand Up America US Foundation. Make sure you put US in there, standupamericaus.org. Everything that we write, books, articles, interviews such as yours, we put them on our website, and we've been around for 20 years. We need donations. Help us out to support what we're doing. We really would appreciate, whether it's $10 or $100 or whatever, and that all can be done on our website, standupamericaus.org.
Sounds good. Michael?
Yeah, for security purposes, I don't do social media, to be honest with you.
Sure.
I've had too many untoward things come up, so I rely on working through the general, through Stand Up America Foundation, and if anybody wants to reach out to me, they can contact go through the foundation.
Okay. Any final words? You're welcome. Any final thoughts you have, Michael?
No, that's it. Appreciate the opportunity to come on, John. I hope it was okay.
It was wonderful.
Totally unprepared.
But that's sometimes the most organic way. We appreciate it. Well, thank you for your time, gentlemen.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate you, and look forward to having you guys on again shortly.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.